Kongres langs my is meneer Zenzele Myeza. Hy is die hoofuitvoerende beampte vir die Agri SETA. Christo gaan met hom 'n onderhoud voer oor die volgende paar minute. Welcome, Mr. Zenzele. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
We're going to have an interesting interview with you. Christo will lead this with us. And thank you very much for going to the trouble to join us over here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Christo?
Thank you, Mr. Myeza. It's always good to see you. We've been coming a long way as part of the board at Agri SETA and also as being your colleague for the past year. Please give us an overall picture of the Agri SETA, what you guys are doing there and what role you are playing, because you play an instrumental role in terms of training, etc.
Okay. No, thanks for that question, Christo. It's the exciting part is that you were part of the leadership, and actually you were leading us in terms of achieving whatever we've achieved in the last financial year. Let me put it that way, which ended in March 2020. In the short space of time, we looked at the whole strategy of Agri SETA. Mainly looking at how can we make a bigger impact, noting that your theme is about the economic value chain in agriculture, and we are saying where do we fit in? We obviously fit in from a skills development point of view, and we say from that point, what can we do better to make a greater impact for the benefit of the sector, agricultural sector. That's what we were focusing on. And in that strategic session that came out of that was to say, let me just the basics, the vision being creating a skilled and a prosperous agricultural sector. That's the vision. Keywords, skilled and prosperous. That goes hand in hand. And the mission that was revised was to say increased access to skilled, in terms of skills development, through strategic partnerships. Keyword, strategic partnerships, being doing that for purposes of having a greater impact in the sector and also having credible research, which is a new focus that we thought about, and lastly, leading to an inclusive economic growth. So that's the basic mission that we looked at, and every other activities or actions or strategic interventions that came about from that particular engagement and session and the strategy as approved by the board, of which you were leading, Christo, was to say, based on that, what are the key areas that we should be focusing on for greater impact? And I will just, if you can allow me just to focus on what we said is we have got a R500 million type budget as a whole from a skills development as Agri SETA. It's not much when you consider the extent of the sector as such. But we said to have a greater impact, it means we need to create these strategic partnerships with other players so that we can create a greater impact. And that is the drive that we're seeing. In a short space of time, we said, let us go and get resources that we're going to put our own resources and other resources and make it a bigger projects that can have bigger impact. That was the drive. SG, just typical examples, is we had the Citrus Growers Association. This is now a 303 million type of project in the whole, but it is not from Agri SETA. We can't afford 303 million. So our contribution in that was 13 million. Being the skills development part of it is aimed at citrus growers exporting, and the job fund put in about 119 million. The Department of Agriculture put in about 37 million. And so I'm saying putting all these things, these funds together can have a bigger impact as opposed to us just running small little projects here and there, as an example. Second example.
But just on that,
yes.
The success of the citrus industry speaks for itself. If you've seen how the export has grown, how many new farmers and what they've done in terms of skills development. So they are now really bearing the fruit of that kind of initiative that was undertaken by the Agri-SETA.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And that is the drive that we were looking at. You pulling me to the economic side of things to say, set an example, the second quarter of the year, agriculture is the only sector that grew, the GDP grew 21%, when all the sectors, in fact, the whole country GDP went down in that as a negative growth in that space. So it's very critical that the focus is on agriculture and make it more attractive, especially to youth, etc., etc. If I may continue.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And then on the artisan side, very important, and I just must highlight that we also are not operating in a vacuum here. We are informed by some national imperatives. For an example, the National Development Plan is calling for at least 30,000 artisans by the year 2030, 30,000. So how do we contribute to that? Even in agriculture, you need artisans, and it comes up in the sector skills plan through the research that indicates what sort of artisans we're needing. And it comes up very clearly that there must be focus on producing that. And this, for an example, the Department of Public Works put in 66 million, targeting 400 artisans, and we're project managing that. The point is, this is money that would otherwise not be in the sector had we not gone out proactively and engaged with parties that have got a common objective in terms of the skills development. That's similar things. Kwanalu, for example, Kwanalu is the KwaZulu-Natal Agricultural and Land Union. Put in there 14.9 million. It's over 3 years. Okay, another strategy that we set, we are always looking at one-year projects. So we said this time, let us look at certainty, medium-term type of projects. For an example, like I'm talking about Kwanalu now, we said 3 years, we want to produce graduate placement, very important, because we don't want to train for the sake of training. We want people to be placed in job creation and all that. 100 graduate placed per annum is the target for that particular project, which gives us 300 graduate placement, solid graduate placement in 3 years' time. And that is a project, that is the type of partnership that we're talking about here. There's another one, Agricultural Development Agency. You see, they've got 40 million per annum over 3 years, which gives them 120 million. What we have observed is that in all these projects, in most cases, the skills development is lacking. So they've got technical equipment and all sorts of very valuable inputs that will assist farmers, but the skills development is always lacking. So we came on to that particular project with ADA, this Agribusiness Development Agency at KZN, and we put in over a 3-year period, 20 million for the skills. And they've gone skills audit, go to the farmers and figure out what are the farmers needing in terms of what they've already put in. So what I'm saying is we are not coming on a blank slate here. The type of thing where we just go out, apply here, do learnerships and all that. We are not, we're trying to cut on that particular space and go more on what is effective and having an impact. That's how we are dealing with this. And it has to be focused on the sector itself. E.g., there was foot and mouth disease. And we said, how do we get into play here? We can't just be operating in absence of the actual activities or things that are happening in the sector. So we went to the University of Pretoria, which is the only veterinary university that is there, and we engaged them and said, okay, we're going to be focusing on PhDs, 60 PhDs, 50 masters and honors, in total, 210 in total, focus, internships. That will specifically go into places like Limpopo, all these provinces
Hotspots.
Yes, the hotspots, and do something for the sector that is relevant, which is a very critical thing. Has got to be relevant to the sector and fruitful for the sector, not just training for the sake of training.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of partnerships that I'm talking about, which we are pushing and pushing hard to make sure that we make that greater impact that I spoke about in terms of our mission. Wool Growers Association. Also, we went and met with them in Klerksdorp. OVK was part of that whole engagement, and they said to us, you know, which we didn't know, that wool shearers are in the short supply. They go to Lesotho to get wool shearers, an example, wool classers and all that kind of stuff. I said, but I mean, we can't have that. Let's train some people, and we came on board there. The total project is 4 million, but our contribution to that was 1.3 million, and we are training 700 wool shearers and 300 wool classers in that space. So I'm just highlighting a couple of these strategic partnerships, Christo, which are aimed at very relevant, demand-driven type of training. Again, we are informed by the National Skills Development Plan there that says you must focus on priority occupations as informed by the sector. Where do they need which skills? Not train for the sake of training. Where does the sector need which skills? Is what is driving us. And we go on and on with those kind of partnerships. But I was just highlighting a few that we just in a short space of time could come up with and project plan and run with accordingly.
But there's a very interesting thing that's happening within your space. The sector skills units, the SCCs. And that for me is a fascinating thing where you draw specific, like the poultry, you've got a poultry grouping, you've got a deciduous fruit grouping, all of these groupings. How does that work? Perhaps it will be good for our listeners just to get an understanding of how it works.
Oh, great stuff. Good question. Because whatever we do must be informed by research. We have focused on creating a research hub within Agri-SETA. We just started. Again, we're not going to do it on our own. There are already existing research, Agricultural Research Council and all those kind of things. So what we do is there are 11 subsectors, like you're mentioning poultry, etc., etc. And those subsectors have got their own committees that form part of what would they come together, they horticulture, etc., etc. They come together, they engage, they fill each other out in terms of what does the sector need. And the participation in that has been great. I must thank the sector for that, because without that, you know, we could be very misdirected in terms of how we put our funding together. So our funding is mainly informed by the sector skills committees. There are 11 subsectors, and from there we get a sector skills plan. And that is the document that guides us in terms of what we take it each year, annual performance plan, and then what do we going to focus on in terms of what we're going to be funding. That's how these things come together. So I will encourage the sector to come on board and be very active in that kind of, because it's very helpful. We don't want to have to be misdirected. We want credible research that comes directly from the sector, and then we can work according to that.
But what I've also observed during your tenure at the Agri-SETA, your big focus to engage with the various industries. Now I know your income is limited. It's based on the skills levies. Yes. And you've got a limited amount of industries that are actually forking out skills levies.
Yes.
But that for me is so critical, because on the one hand, there's an income stream that you must manage, that you must nurture, and that you must grow. And then there's an expense side, and you must make sure that that money that flows back into the sector, that is well directed. And as you said, not training just for the sake of training, but it must be specific, and it must be needs driven. Yes. So just coming back to where do you get your money from, and what is the focus specifically in that space?
Okay. Like I said, when I started, that our pool is about a $500 million, 500 million. I'm just rounding up, and that pool is not sufficient. And our drive is to say, how do we increase that pool? You must note as normal that according to the Skills Development Act, it's not everybody that contributes to the skills levy. People who have got employees above who pay the payroll of 500K. So that pool is quite small. And therefore, for us, the increasing that pool is very critical, such that there could be much more resources that will be plowed back to the sector. To that extent, we went out and engaged, this is what I personally had to do with the team, engaged with the leaders in the industries, all the subsectors mainly, to figure out what it is that where we are doing wrong, and what is it that we can do for them to benefit from what we are doing, and how can we work together to achieve that. So that sort of engagement was very productive and helpful in terms of, we've got even other players. We were not poaching, but they came on board from other sectors that they can. So in actual fact, they belong to the agricultural sector space, but they were not contributing. They were contributing elsewhere. But we were not pushing. But based on the engagements, they came on board to say, we think this is where we belong, and then that increases the pool, and then we can plow back. Again, mandatory grants, the usage thereof is very critical. Other than discretionary grants is one part, but the mandatory grants. In that regard, the participation has been quite problematic because we have not made the system to be very smooth and efficient. You can't take too much time of a business person with these things. So we have tried to make it much more smoother, much more efficient and simpler. To complete the forms, what do you need, what is your workplace skills plan, and what are your annual training ATRs, and then based on that we move. And then there's a lot, when we put a target to this thing, there's a lot of new players that have come on board to be part and parcel of that, so that they can benefit from the mandatory grants, and then we plow back in that regard with their engagement. Very, very helpful type of engagement, and this is how we go about trying to increase the participation of the sector, which will ultimately yield results in terms of the available funds, so to say.
Mr. Myeza, yes, it was indeed a pleasure to have you here. Any concluding remarks?
My concluding remarks, firstly, congratulations on your appointment. You are very important as Agri SA in terms of what we do as Agri-SETA, and you are also a leader within our Agri-SETA as well. And secondly, I'm saying I would like to thank the sector for cooperating with us, coming from a very low base, if I may say, servicing the sector, etc., and having the very valid information from the sector that will assist us in putting things together. And thirdly, sector has come on board in terms of the strategic partnerships that I was talking about, to make sure that we are focused and we can increase our footprint, etc., etc. And a very important point that I may not forget is there is what we call land reform, because we are operating, like I said, not in isolation. And that land reform is a critical aspect of what we need to be looking at. The country is littered with failures in that space, and the more you look at it, you find that the skills part has not been looked at. That is part of the drive that we are looking at now, to say how can we, on existing land reform projects, how do we come on board and push that from a skills development, such that it's not only the technical equipment that is there, but the skills part comes into play and make the whole thing to be what it is supposed to be, as an example. In that light, it has been very helpful. I'm very grateful to be associated with the sector, a very important sector. All of us have had breakfast before coming here. Without agriculture, we wouldn't. I'm preaching to the converted here. And from where I sit, I say in terms of the value chain of the economic value that we are creating there, we come from the skills development, and we want to continuously participate with, cooperate with the sector in terms of making sure that we make this as valuable, as valid, and as relevant as it can be.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Pierre, over to you.
Mr. Myeza, thank you very much. You know, training to do how to do things, I suppose, is the most important thing in agriculture, because it's an ever-changing landscape of the skills that we need. And I'm very impressed by the fact that you said that you know, you research the market of training before you actually do training. Thank you very much for that. You're an integral part and an integral of the setup of agriculture, and agriculture integrated side of it. And we have great appreciation of what you do. You must be assured of the fact that in future there's going to be more demands on the courses and skills that you have to assist us with to make a success of agriculture, especially the entrance of new agriculturals, farmers into agriculture, so that they can have the skills to actually compete, you know, and that we get ourselves in a position that the consumers of South Africa are dependent on the skills of that farmers have, and you are playing an integral part in making that work. So we have great appreciation. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.